This next demo is on applying Illustrator effects to your shapes. I'll start by drawing a shape. And we'll look under effects. Most of the effects at the top part of the menu here are Illustrator or vector based, whereas the effects at the bottom of the menu are Photoshop or raster based. Now, what is the difference between a raster file and a vector file? We'll look at a raster file. A raster file is made up of tiny pixels, and when we zoom in on it, you can actually see the pixels. Okay, this is a low-res image, whereas an Illustrator file or vector file is made up of mathematical paths. And the beauty of a vector file is no matter how much we blow it up, it holds its quality. It does not fall apart. Okay. So I'm going to apply some of these filters, show you how they work, and then I'll show you how you might apply them in a tech illustration. So first we're going to start with a drop shadow. So I have my star selected. I'm going to go Effect, Stylize Drop Shadow. Okay, and we get a dialog box. And right now I'll put that on normal. And you can see the shadow here it's creating. There's opacity to it. The default is 75%, so it makes it transparent. You have an X and Y offset. So your X offset is going to move it this way, and your Y offset is going to move it this way. Usually the default is what you need. Okay, you can also change the color of your drop shadow, just picking it from the color picker. Okay, and we'll go ahead and apply that. And there's our drop shadow. If I move the shape, it goes along. Okay, now, good example of a drop shadow. Of this tech illustration of a M4 assault rifle. And you can see the drop shadow here. Okay, so we want to look at the layers to see how they achieve that. And you can see we have a layer called drop shadow. So I'm going to hide all the other ones. Okay, basically what they did here was they selected all of the shapes on their tech illustration and they united them with Pathfinder. That gave them one big shape, and then they applied the drop shadow to that shape. So if I look at my appearance palette, first of all, if I get it selected, and there's the drop shadow on my appearance palette. So there's the shape, and then they apply the drop shadow to it. And then all the other layers on top of it. Okay. All right, the next one is going to be a Gaussian blur. So I'm going to go to Effects. Now this one happens to be a Photoshop filter, so we're going to go down to the bottom half to Blur, to Gaussian blur. Okay, and you can see what it does. It blurs outward from your image. Use this when you want to put a soft edge on your shape. Okay. Okay, this one's a feather. Okay, this one will show us a Gaussian blur. As I said, this is when we want to put a soft edge on our shape. Okay, so if I select that, here's my Gaussian blur. Turn it off, and you can see it has the nice hard edge. When you apply the blur to it, it softens it up. Okay. Next one we want to look at is a feather. Now, feathers is very similar to a Gaussian blur. A Gaussian blur will blur from your path outward, where the feather will blur inward. So let's try a feather on that. So we're going to go Effect, Stylize, Feather. Here's our dialog box, and we can adjust these. Okay, that's a pretty nice soft edge there. Now, I recommend using a feather instead of a Gaussian blur for these effects because a Gaussian blur will tend to pixelate when you zoom in on it, where a feather is more subtle. Now, let's look at a feather effect. We take a look at this little shadow underneath this chimera. And you look on our appearance palette, it has a feather on it to give it a nice soft edge. So there it is without the feather and with the feather. Okay. Okay, the next effect is an inner glow. So we're going to go Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. And this is very, very similar to a feather. And it has a blur on it. And same opacity. Normally these would be on normal. So that is an inner glow. Now let's take a look at an outer glow. Effect, Stylize, Outer Glow. And you can see the effect it's giving us here. Take it down some. It's almost like a drop shadow, but a little bit different. So that is your outer glow. Another effect here is in that same area, scribble. So we'll go Effect, Stylize, and Scribble. And it's just a nice, cool effect. Makes it look like it was hand drawn. When you're in here, you have an angle of them. You can see how they're changing as we move this around. You have path overlap. See what that's doing? It's overlapping the paths to get it where you want it. You have stroke width. Okay, this next part is on applying warp effects. And warp effects works nice on type. So go ahead and type something in here. Okay. And this will work on a font. We don't have to create outlines out of it. Okay, so I have it selected. And I'm going to go Effect to Warp, and I'll start with Arc. Okay, and you get some pretty cool effects here. There's a horizontal and vertical. You can see what it's doing when I switch them. And we can also adjust the bend. Okay, go one way or the other. So that is Arc. Now we can go right in here without canceling, and we'll take a look at Arc Lower. Okay, so it's curving on the baseline at the bottom. I have Arc Upper. Okay, now we have a straight baseline. Arch. Okay, it almost starts to look like type on a path. Bulge. Okay. Shell Lower. Shell Upper. Then we'll look at Flag. You can see your little previews kind of show you what it's going to do. And this is wave. Both of these are on 0, so I need to move it some. Okay, pretty cool effect there. Fish. Okay, let me put these back. Looks like a fish. Okay. I cancel that out and then go back in. Effects warp. So we're up to rise. So we have a horizontal and vertical on that. You see you can adjust your horizontal and vertical. Fisheye, okay, like a fisheye lens. Inflate, very similar. Squeeze, and twist. Okay, this kind of looks like what I was doing with the warp filler. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just going to put this back arc and okay it. One thing you need to be aware of is once I apply this filter, it will not allow me to create outlines out of it. Okay, it's going to stay a font. So I really can't modify it too much. I can do that, but I cannot move anchor points. Okay, so those are some warp effects.